Hello, it's Dr. C again, and today I'm here with another memory, and this memory is about my father. In fact, these are memories about my father, and I've entitled it, Nobody's Perfect. I'm going to warn you, the one who doesn't turn out to be perfect in these stories is me. So anyway, Nobody's Perfect, a story about my father. When my father was young, he lived in a very poor neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan. And he and his friends ran errands for a gang called the Purple Gang. They were too young to be in the gang, so they just ran errands for them. A lot of them had older brothers who were in the gang. And my father knew a lot of these gang members. Now, when I say a gang, I don't mean like a neighborhood gang. I mean a gang like the mafia, except this was called the Purple Gang. And you can even look and find a movie called The Purple Gang about this gang in Detroit. Although, according to my father, it wasn't a very good movie and it really had nothing to do with reality. And I do remember on one occasion we went to Miami Beach and we went out to dinner with one of the members of the Purple Gang who had recently been released from prison. And he was one of the leaders of the gang. So as a little child, I got to have dinner with a famous gang member from the 30s. I don't know that that's important, but it's the beginning of the story about my father. My father graduated from high school at about the age of 15. The reason he graduated so early was there was absolutely nothing to do during the summers, so he just went to school year-round because it made sense, and he got out early. While he was in school, he decided to take secretarial classes. Why did he take secretarial classes? Not because he wanted to be a secretary. He took the classes because he figured out that he could meet girls in those classes, because those classes were populated almost entirely by girls. So my dad took secretarial classes in order to meet girls. On the other hand, my dad was very good at the secretarial classes. He could type 120 words a minute, and in fact used to enter typing contests because his typing was so superior. He also learned how to take shorthand, and most of you remember what shorthand is, a quick way to write things down. And he was also exceptionally good at this as well. The problem with having these skills was that later on, when he was a professional and he hired secretaries, he was more skilled in these activities than the secretaries were. So that created a little problem for him as he watched them struggle with things that he could do himself. When World War II came along, my father went to Officers Candidate School in Miami Beach. And the way they ran the classes is that each day they do a series of lectures. And then the next day, they would test you over the lectures and then do another series of lectures. So what my father would do is he'd go into the lectures and he'd take down the entire lecture verbatim in shorthand. Then he'd go back to his floor at OCS and he'd invite all the guys on his floor to come to his room and study his notes. And of course they came because he literally had the lectures verbatim. Well, there was a problem. The problem was that his floor was getting statistically higher marks than any of the other floors in the program. So the Army launched an investigation, and they found out about my dad's notes. And he was called into a higher officer's office. And he explained what he was doing, and he was told that he could continue to take his notes, but he was no longer allowed to share them with the people on his floor. This really upset my father, who dropped from being one of the top people in the class to much lower, but made it through OCS just the same. Eventually, my father became a certified public accountant, and he was one of the only CPAs in the country who did not ever attend college. Now, on the one hand, he could have felt very proud of this, that he did this despite the fact that he didn't go to college. But instead, my father felt inferior. He felt that he wasn't as good as those who went to college. And this bothered him throughout his career. He used my sister and me as help in the office. So at a very young age, I learned how to use an adding machine. Now, the adding machines in those days that the accountants used were fairly heavy, and you could carry them around with you in a case. So he would carry his adding machine as he went to see his clients and then take it back when he was done. And an interesting story about the adding machines is that when the phones came out with keypads, originally, of course, you all remember the dial phones. Well, when the keypads came out, they put the numbers on the keypads on the phones in the opposite order that they were on the adding machines. And the belief among the accountants, at least, was that they did this because they were concerned that the accountants were so good at putting the numbers into their adding machine that the phone dial pad wouldn't be able to keep up with them. So they did it to make it more difficult for those who were good with adding machines to operate the phones. Whether or not this is really why they did it, I don't know, but it certainly makes a lot of sense, and this was a story that was popular at that time. My father used to use both my sister and me to help him add up figures at the office, so we'd come and add up numbers and things like that. But he also used us for one of the jobs that he had, which was auditing theaters. What they would do is they would get a really important movie in, and they would want to check to make sure that the theater didn't cheat them out of money. So they'd have somebody come and count the number of people who went into the theater. So my sister, the movie that she did this for was West Side Story, and my sister loved musicals. So my sister got to see West Side Story, I don't know how many times, dozens of times, and she loved it. I, on the other hand, got to be the one to audit for the Indianapolis 500, because in those days, they would put it on a big screen in a stadium and people could pay money to go watch the Indianapolis 500. I had zero interest in the Indianapolis 500. The only thing I found interesting were the crashes. But I was kind of bored with them just going round and round and knew nothing about car racing. But I would go and I would stand outside counting all the people coming into the Indianapolis 500, one of my early jobs. My father purchased the very first electronic calculator. And it was just like those adding machines, except besides adding and subtracting, it also multiplied and divided. But it was a mechanical system. It wasn't like the things we see now. So when you put in a problem, like you put in 25 times 7, the machine would start going, and eventually it would spit out your answer. In addition to the normal keys, the machine had a red button, which was called the panic button. And this was the button that you were supposed to hit if for whatever reason something went wrong, and it would just kill whatever operation you were working on. Well, I was working for my father, and he had just got that brand new calculator. And I wasn't very old. I was in middle school, I believe, junior high school, as we said in those days. And I'm sitting there working on the new machine, and I'm thinking to myself, Self, what would happen if I divided by 0? I thought, that's worth a try. So I divided by 0. And the machine began to go, and every time it went, it would print out a row of zeros. And it just kept doing this and doing this and doing this. And of course, the answer when you divide by 0 is infinity. So I started hitting the panic button, and it went and I hit the panic button again. It went Then I tried to turn it off. It went and I thought, oh my God, I'm in trouble. So then I unplugged it, and I plugged it back in again, and it went it was just spitting out those zeros. So I unplugged it. I went to my dad and I said, Dad, gotta tell you, I have no idea what happened, but all of a sudden your brand new calculator, which was still under warranty luckily, was just spitting out zeros. And so he had to take it back in and get it fixed. And I never told him. That's why I said nobody's perfect. I should have been more honest, but I didn't want to get in a lot of trouble. I messed up his brand new toy, and I just didn't want to get in trouble. And he never knew that it was my fault that I had done something to cause that. And these are a few, there's other stories about my father, but these are a few of the stories that I wanted to share with you today. He was a very, very intelligent man who was dedicated to his work. He was a workaholic. And, since it's tax season, I should mention that my sister and I considered ourselves to be tax season orphans, because when tax season hit, we never saw our father. He was working all of the time. And one year, I don't know how many of you remember this, but tax season used to end on March 15th. So when they moved it to April 15th, we thought, oh no, we're losing another month with our father. And anyway, those are a few stories about my life with my father. And on that note, I will say bye for now. Now it's time for one more thing about my father. Okay. My father was colorblind. He couldn't tell the red from the green. In order to get into the Army and become a captain, he memorized the colorblindness test. And that's how he passed it, because he couldn't have got in otherwise because of that problem. Anyway, if you remember how accountants worked, I don't know if they still do this anymore, but they used the color red to note that it was a negative number, and they used black to show that it was a positive number. Well, my father couldn't tell the negatives from the positives. And he was told by CPAs that he could never become an accountant since he was colorblind. So my dad that really shook him up. And in fact, this was early days of Polaroid, and he sent a letter to Polaroid to ask them if they could make a pair of glasses for him that would block out the reds so that he would be able to know which ones were red and which ones were black. And apparently they did make those glasses for him, but it didn't help much. It still was too hard. So then he came up with the idea of putting the black numbers to the left and the red numbers to the right and making them all black. And he just set up his own system. And that was how he got past that problem of colorblindness. When we moved to New Mexico, my father got a partner in his business. And surprise, surprise, the partner was also colorblind. Same problem, red and green, colorblind. How unique is that they were both colorblind CPAs, but they were. And they had a problem with traffic lights. They couldn't tell the reds from the greens. And near where the partner lived in Albuquerque, there was a traffic light where they had it reversed, and they had the green on top and the red on the bottom. And both my father and his partner would run that light all the time. So that's the story of my father and his colorblindness. One more thing. And on that note, I will stop. One more thing, once again. Okay. My father really liked to gamble, and he loved going to Las Vegas. And what would happen is we would check into our room. Well, first of all, we'd arrive in Las Vegas, and he'd look at my mother and he'd say, well, do we need a room? We're only going to be here for one night. In other words, I'll just gamble straight through. And, well, we always got a room. He was joking. And on one occasion, he came with my mother without us, and he told her, I'm just going to gamble until I lose $50. And he started gambling. And he gambled and he gambled. And eventually my mother, who was not a gambler, went up to bed. And next morning, he's still not in bed. And she comes down and she finds him at the blackjack tables. And he says, well, I never lost the $50. She says, oh, okay. And the entire trip that he was in Las Vegas, he never lost that $50. And I think at the very end, when they were at the airport, he went in and he finally lost the $50. But he won during the entire trip. Now, I'd like to tell you that every trip went that way, but obviously it didn't. He never made a lot of money gambling. He just enjoyed doing it. And that is one more thing about my father. One more thing, twice again about my father. Before my father became a CPA, he used to work at the Detroit Zoo. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever been to the Detroit Zoo, but it is considered to be one of the best zoos in the country, or it was back then. I don't know what's happened since because I've been gone a long time, but it was really an incredible zoo. And he didn't work with the animals. He was in the office doing bookkeeping. He was a bookkeeper at the zoo. But he used to take advantage of his position and borrow animals from the zoo and take them home. Now, my grandmother was not into having exotic animals in her house, but my dad did it anyway. And in fact, when my mother met my father, it was at a beach, and he had a big white boa constrictor that he was carrying around. And that's what attracted my mother to my father, was his big boa constrictor. And who knew that that would be the beginning of a very long marriage? So that is one more thing, once again or twice again about my father. And on that, that's it for now. One final last thing, which is broken into 6 parts. One final last thing about my father. When I got together with my wife, Mary, I went over to her house and I was talking to her father, who was at that point in time a retired Marine drill sergeant. And he looked at me and he said, "What did your father do during the war?" And I said, "Well, he was stationed in India." "Well, where was he stationed in India?" he said to me. I said, "He was stationed very close to the Taj Mahal." He says, "Well, what was he?" I says, "He was a captain. He was an officer." He says, Captain Carone. And then he disappears and goes back to another room and comes back with the troop book from the war. And you see, Mary's father was also stationed in India, coincidentally, which is interesting because I grew up initially in Detroit and she grew up in New Mexico. So he opens up the troop book and he thumbs through and he finds a picture, and there's a picture of my father in this troop picture, and he's in the front row with the other officers, and Mary's father is about 3 rows back. What a coincidence. And he remembered. He says, Captain Carone. Now, coincidentally, a while later, we were talking with Mary's brother, Nash, and we told him the story of the troop book. And he goes and he gets his high school yearbook. Now, Nash and I went to different high schools in different parts of town, fairly far separated. And he pulls out his book and he opens it up to a page, and there's a picture with Nash and me both in the same picture. And what this was I was the president of the Latin club for my high school. And every year we would celebrate Saturnalia. Well, that year we celebrated it at Nash's high school with the other Latin clubs. And Nash was a wrestler. So he was wrestling. So there he was in the front wrestling, and there I was sitting at the head table as the president of one of the Latin clubs. And so not only did they have a picture of my father in their house, they also had a picture of me in their house, which is just very strange coincidence. Anyway, my father took a boat to go to India with a lot of the other soldiers. And one of the people on the boat was a very Orthodox Jewish man. My father said, I don't understand why they gave him the kind of work that they did, because he wasn't going to fight. He was very smart, and he should have been given something else, like an intelligence. But meanwhile, he was sent to India. Now, they crossed the international date line on the boat. And when they crossed the international date line, it was Friday night. And when they woke up the next morning, it was Sunday morning. Well, Jews celebrate the Sabbath on Friday night and Saturday. And this man panicked because he had missed a Sabbath and he had no idea what to do. So he did the logical thing. He began celebrating 2 days for the Sabbath, the one he missed and the one that was the actual Sabbath in India for the Jews. And he also began writing letters all over the world to find out what he should do. And he wrote these letters in Yiddish. And Yiddish is the language of the Eastern European Jews, was the language of the Eastern European Jews. And my father was one of the censors for the letters. So they would give my father these letters, but my father couldn't read Yiddish. He didn't understand what he was writing, but he just assumed he was writing to find out what he should do since he missed a Sabbath. And he would just send them on through. And the man never found out a solution. So I'm assuming he just continued to celebrate 2 days throughout the entire war. Okay. My dad was very lucky to be in India where he was, because there was absolutely no action there. The only action was an airplane dropped a bomb in a nearby city because the pilot got lost and he had a bomb, so he just dropped it. And it was pretty far from my father. That was the only action that he saw. Now, unfortunately, the rest of my family was not that lucky. One of my uncles was a prisoner of war in Germany under the Nazis. And one of my other uncles was killed on his first flight over Japan as a pilot. So my dad lucked out in this situation. Anyway, my dad enjoyed being in India. He spent a lot of his time playing table tennis. And there were 2 table tennis tables. And he played at one, and another man played at the other one. And the other man, according to my father, was a better table tennis player. But they never played each other, and each one dominated their tables. So my dad spent a lot of time beating people at table tennis. A lot better than having to be out there being shot at. So he was very fortunate for this. Another thing that happened was the officers got together and they decided to have a Little Miss America contest. And they encouraged the enlisted men to send in pictures of their daughters so that they could choose somebody to be Little Miss America in India. And Mary's mother sent her picture in. And my wife Mary, as a baby or a young child, was chosen Little Miss America in India. And there's a real possibility that my father was one of the officers who voted in that election. Very strange coincidences. I don't know how to explain these. One last thing. I keep going on and on. Mary tells me I talk too much about stuff. Anyway, the last thing is that my father came up with the idea. There was a man, an Indian gentleman, a soldier, who was fighting for our side. And he wanted to become an American citizen. So my father suggested that they hold the ceremony in front of the Taj Mahal. And they went along with this. And we had pictures in our house of the first and possibly the only time that somebody was made an American citizen in front of the Taj Mahal. And my dad participated in that, and it was his idea. So that's the end of all my one more things about my dad. And on that note, I really do say bye for now. My name's Elwood. I'm Dr. C. I need Untitled. Real flesh, that's me. Psychologist. Adopted who are here because we care for you. Ta-da! Very good, Elwood. Thank you, Dr. C. That was really nice what you said about your father. It was very touching. It was touching. Yes, it was. Was it? Yes, it was. Yes, it was. I never heard you talk about him so much. Well, I really haven't talked about him to you. I know. It makes me feel sad. Well, you never met my father. I know I didn't. I met your mother and I talked to her and she was nice and she liked me a lot. She did. Yeah. Yes, she did. Well, you sure told a lot of nice stories about him that I never heard before. Never. There were a lot of consequences between you and Mary when you got together. It's not consequences, it's coincidences. Close enough, Dr. C, close enough. Yes, there were a lot of coincidences when we got together. How come? I don't have an answer for that. Their coincidences are just things that happen and you really don't know why they come together. That's very confusing. Well, it was a little strange, I thought too, but it was a nice strange. Well, so there can be nice strange? Yeah, there can be nice strange. And there can be scary strange. And there can be scary strange. But this was nice strange. Well, that's good to know. You know, I'm surprised that you didn't tell your dad that you broke the machine. I didn't want to tell him. Well, would he have hit you? No, he wouldn't have hit me. He never hit me. He never hit you? No, never did he hit me. He would yell at me and get angry, but he never hit me. Wow. What about your mother? Did she hit you? My mother didn't hit me at all either. I was really lucky. I had parents who didn't believe in hitting their children. Oh, okay. And I guess you turned out all right. Well, I hope so. Anyway, I really like those stories. I like the story about being in India and all that. And I'm wondering, do you feel bad when you do something wrong? Yeah, I do feel bad when I do something wrong. It's one of the reasons that I don't do a lot of wrong things. Yeah, well... You ever say wrong things to other people? Yes, I have said wrong things to other people. Huh. But not very many. Why don't you do very many? Because like I said, I feel so guilty and uncomfortable when I say bad things that it stops me from staying or doing a lot of bad things. I got another question, Dr. C. What's your question? Do you ever make me say bad things to people? That's a good question. Yeah, I thought it was. Because you make me talk, so if I see something bad, it's your fault. Yeah, it's my fault if you say something bad. You got that right, Dr. C. Well, I will tell you, you have never said anything bad to a child. I have never said anything bad to a child. You have never said anything bad in front of a child. Well, that's good to know. Have I said anything bad to grown-ups? Well, I can think of one time that you said something that wasn't very nice. What did I say, Dr. C? I don't remember at all. No. Well, one time we ended up at a party entertaining. I never remember going to a party and entertaining. Were the children nice? It wasn't for children. It was for our 40-year-old grown-up. Oh, I didn't know we did that. I didn't know we did that until we did it. That's a little confusing. Well... The man's wife, the man was 40 years old, and his wife wanted to have a surprise birthday party for him. And she wanted me to come and entertain because she knew that I was a ventriloquist. Yeah, you're a pretty good ventriloquist. Your mouth only moves a little bit. I move my mouth a lot more. Well, you're not a ventriloquist. I could be. I am Elwood, the great ventriloquist. Okay, Elwood. Yeah, I could be a ventriloquist. It's ventriloquist. Close enough. Anyway, so we went to this party. And I told the man's wife that I really didn't do parties and I didn't do adult jokes. that I was just going to do a piece that we call Peace in the Family. That I remember. And we talked about communication, cooperation, kindness, and conflict resolution. Good remembering. Thank you, Dr. C. Anyway, we did our piece, and people laughed when it was funny, and they really seemed to enjoy what we were doing. Well, that's good. So what was the problem? Well, after we finished, the 40-year-old birthday boy, whom I really didn't feel comfortable with, I didn't like him, but I really didn't know him, so that was kind of unfair. But the 40-year-old birthday boy looked over at you. He didn't look at you. He never looked at me the entire time I was at the party. He looked over at you, and he said to you, he said, that was very nice, but that was for children. That's right. And this is my birthday party, and I'm a grown-up. Do you know any adult jokes? And what did I say? I said, you said, I know you, don't I? I said that? Yeah, you said that. Well, you made me do it. Yes, I did. And what happened after that? Well, everybody except the birthday boy laughed, and that was the end of my show, and the birthday boy never said anything to me or looked at me throughout the entire party. So you made me say something that was kind of mean. It was kind of mean, and, but it was funny, and I was supposed to be funny, and everybody laughs. So it's okay to be mean if you're funny. Well, if you're a comedian, it is, and you're entertaining, and I was entertaining. But anyway, I can't really remember very many times. That's the only time I can remember when you ever said anything bad to anybody, except to one person. Who's that, Dr. C? Sometimes you say bad things to me, mean things. I do? Yes, you do. Well, you make me do it. Yes, I make you do it. Why is that? Well, sometimes you're kind of my conscience. What's a conscience? Conscience is like a little voice inside of you that tells you whether you're doing something wrong or when you're doing something right. Huh. And you have one of those? Yeah, I have a big one of those. Did you ever see the movie, the cartoon Pinocchio? Yeah, I liked Pinocchio. I really liked him. Well, you remember Jiminy Cricket? Yeah, he sat on Pinocchio's shoulder. Well, Jiminy Cricket was Pinocchio's conscience. Huh. So he told him what he was, whether what he was doing was good or bad. I understand. So he helped him be a good little wooden guy. I'm a wooden guy too, so he's like a cousin. Yeah, he is like a cousin. Anyway, so you're kind of like my conscience. I am? Yes, you are. You're like Jiminy Cricket. Don't call me Jiminy, call me Elwood. I will remember that. Anyway, you're kind of like Jiminy Cricket because when I make mistakes, a lot of times you tell me that that wasn't nice. I do, that's true. And I appreciate that you do that because you help me figure out whether what I'm doing is okay or not okay. That's good to know. You want to know something else? What's that, Dr. C? Well, I'm kind of like your conscience, too. Wow, so we're co-consciences. We're what? Co-consciousness. That's hard to say. It's hard for me to say. I don't know that I could say it either. But you were trying. Okay. Anyway, we tell each other when we mess up. That's nice. It is nice. So you help me, and I help you. You help me, and I help you. Wow, that sounds like a song. I guess it's time for your song now. I guess it is. Okay. And here comes Elwood's last word as he sings his song. Well, it's going to be a poem. It's not going to be a song. As he tells the poem at the end of the show. Maybe later we'll make it into a song. I help you and you help me. A poem by Elwood SPLINTER. I help you and you help me. That's the way it's supposed to be. Helping each other is the right thing to do. You help me and I help you. If everyone helped each other the way that we do, people would stick together just like glue. They wouldn't fight or be so uptight, and I really think that'd be all right. I don't like screaming or yelling at all. I don't like when they hit each other in a great big brawl. People could learn a lot from the way that we are, so I'm going to make that wish upon the North Star. The end.